hope that's going to be good. Sucks is that like spring break feels forever ago. At least like the week before, like because we didn't have class the last Thursday before spring break. So then we had class Tuesday. That was really like 2 weeks ago. Yeah, and there's only like 6 weeks left of class, so that's gonna go quick too. I'm excited for that. I'm ready for the summertime. So we're gonna back up just a little bit. I think there was some that I missed on the video, so some of the factors that are going to influence this decomposition and also the mineralization of our plant residues is going to be our environmental conditions. Because the microbes, they have a specific environment that they thrive in. The quality of those residues, which we're about to go over here in a moment. Some of those physical factors, and then most importantly is going to be this carbon to nitrogen ratio. And I know some of this might be carryover from soils, because I've had y'all in soils. Some of this might be a little carryover from fertility, but just to make sure that everyone has gotten this information enough as we move forward, and that you move out to, like, I guess what I'm trying to do is make sure that I give you all the stuff that's going to be important when you leave here. Again, like I said, those equations don't mean anything if there's no point in those, because we're mostly just going to be dealing with pH, mineralization, nitrogen, phosphorus, and sulfur. So the quality of the residues basically is going to be how well those structures break down and which ones those microbes can decompose the quickest. And so I use this example in my soils class. I'm not sure if I used it here, but you know, when we go throughout the day, we get a little shaky. You know, like we can tell that, like, man, I need to get some food real quick. Like there's something. The first thing we go for is what? What's the first thing you go for in the vending machine? What is it?
Protein bar.
A protein bar? Anything else? A candy bar, like a Snickers, maybe some Skittles, something that's going to give us this boost of energy, right? Because those sugars are easy to break down. So much like our human bodies, soil microbes and the plant residues, they have the same thing. So those microbes are going to go after those sugars and starches first. The way to get a quick burst of energy is simple food, right? So sugars being candy or some sort of fruit or something sweet that's going to give us this boost. Our starches, pastas, and things like that's going to give us an energy and make us feel like, you know what, I can actually make it. So like carbohydrates, and then proteins, like a protein bar. Those crude proteins and hemicellulose and cellulose, those are going to be kind of like the structures that kind of hold everything together. We have fats, waxes, and oils, and those are the things that are very difficult to break down. I mean, you can just think about that from a human perspective. The hardest thing for our bodies to digest and decompose and metabolize are going to be fats and oils, right? So we want to stay away from very fatty foods. And then finally we have this lignin and phenolic compounds, and those are the very sturdy, stable structures that kind of give our plants that they can stay upright. That's like the woody part of that. So that's like our getting into our phloem and our xylem, and things that make our plants stand up, and they're very difficult to break down. They have a very big molecular structure, and it's hard for those microbes to decompose that, especially when it's real easy for the sugars and starches. Makes sense, right? So knowing what you have out there, if you have a high lignin content like a tree, it's going to take a while for that to decompose, right? The carbon to nitrogen ratio is going to be like 600 or 700 to 1, maybe even more. So it's going to take a long time for those structures to break down. Where it's at, you know, we talk about being on the surface and no-till and things like that. So one of the things is that when we till, we're incorporating the residues in the soil that increases the surface area of the microbes, but also at the same time we're introducing, when we till, what are we introducing? What are we doing to our soil structure? What's that?
Losing some topsoil.
And how are we losing the topsoil? And so you can even bring this back to soil and water conservation. If we have, I guess what I'm trying to lead into is this thing of carbon sequestration. When we have carbon in the soil and we turn it, what are we putting into the soil? Gas. What gas? What's that? Oxygen, correct. So when we turn the soil over, we're adding that oxygen in. And if you remember back, aerobic metabolism is faster than anaerobic metabolism. So that carbon gets decomposed faster and given off as carbon dioxide. Okay? All right. Reducing that particle size. And so one of the things about driving a combine through the field is that some of that material does get chopped. And so that is going to be a little easier to break down, falls on the top of the surface. Though that material decomposes more from the microbes that are on top of the soil and just natural weathering processes, right? That over time, eventually we have a lot of oxygen that is exacerbating or speeding up that decomposition process for whatever is out there. Just like our leaf material. Like I mowed my grass in the middle of the winter because the leaf material was so much, it's not there anymore. Because I changed the particle size, right? So it was easier to break down and decompose in the weather. That's why we want to like mulch our grass clippings. The finer they are, the more they break down. Make sense? This carbon to nitrogen ratio thing is probably it's the keystone of any mineralization or soil chemical process that we can think of, because this microbial population is part of that nutrient cycling, which is pretty much what we want. We need that nitrogen and the phosphorus and the sulfur that are in those plant materials to be returned to the soil. And so have y'all done anything with like plant material biomass and elemental removal? No? So that so let's say we take, I'll bring this back to forages. We cut a forage crop for hay. There's a phosphorus content of that dry matter that is removed from the soil. It's not there anymore. And so we need these microbes to break down and resupply some of that phosphorus with, so y'all haven't gone over that very much. No.
I've done it for work,
But not for class. I think we're going to do that later today in soil and water, just to kind of go over that principle. But the problem that we're having with this soil health is that we're expending more energy than we're putting in. And so if you can think about, again, going back to the humans, that if we have a calorie deficit, we will lose weight, right? So if we expend more energy than we're putting in, then we're not gaining weight, we're not growing, things of that nature. And so the same thing with the soil is that we're putting this fake energy into it, these empty calories almost. I don't know, man, the easiest way that I can think about that is that we're putting empty calories into our soil, forcing our plants to grow faster than they normally would, because the soil can't supply those nutrients for the crop needs, right? So the same principle applies, that we are we're putting the things in the soil because we took them out too much. So the plants take the nutrients up from the soil, we cut the plant and then take it off the field. That cycle ends right there, and then we have to put more nutrients back. It's kind of the basic premise of soil health and soil quality and carbon sequestration, is that if we have carbon in the soil, we get better mineralization. We get better nutrient cycling, and we can get some nutrients out of the soil that typically weren't there. We don't have to apply them. So this carbon nitrogen ratio, Those are the two main drivers of the energy for the microbes. And so I've went back and forth with this. I'm going to take what this person has said that came out of the book, that typically at about 24 to 1, that's the ideal. We have everything's even. Our mineralization and immobilization are neutral. There's no net either way. There's no net mineralization. There's no net immobilization. So somewhere between 24 to 1, as we start to move down this, as we start to decrease this carbon to nitrogen ratio, we start to get a net mineralization, because now there's an excess nitrogen, or you might be able to think about it as there's not an excess carbon. There's enough of both, and now the microbes don't need that nitrogen in order to break down this carbon. But as we start to get up to our corn stover, our wheat straw and rye straw, sawdust, our leaf material, that carbon to nitrogen ratio increases. And I know I've mentioned that my grandfather would rake his leaves and put it in the garden and then go get a manure source and put it over the top of them, so that you balance out that carbon and nitrogen ratio. So this is probably going to be the keystone to anything that you do dealing with soil nutrient cycling, carbon sequestration, things like that. Questions? Anything to discuss? I saw y'all sitting in Dr. Phenolic's class, and everyone was just like, "You talking again?" I'm going to try to figure out a way so that we can have more class-led discussion. That's kind of been on my brain a lot over the spring break, as to how do y'all just not sit there and take notes the whole time? I thought you were gonna.
The only thing Phenol's doing is, hey, got it, cool. Hey, got it, cool. Just going through it, trying to get that.
I don't know that that's a very effective way. It's not, and that's not what we're doing here. So the hard part is getting. How do you start discussion? And how do you start a discussion on things that y'all might not have been introduced to? I don't know. I've got to figure it out just as much, because I don't want y'all sitting there going, this guy's just giving notes, and talking.
That's usually what we do in like history classes. It's like we always start off with discussion, and sometimes I've had professors like assign a student to start it off. It's not always the most fun, but yeah. I mean, sometimes like when you read something that's really interesting, it really helps get it home.
I will try to find some articles that we can do that might. The hard part is finding articles that are suitable, that are relevant, that are digestible. Because man, them articles can get too much, and if it gets too much for me, guess what I do? Next. Now you got too many equations in there. Done. I like to see a few graphs, some things that I can like see a little bit, and I think that is what is needed in a 4,000 level class as you're moving out into your careers, is being able to see that. Added organic, man. 24 to 1 is about the middle. Anything greater than that, we're getting net immobilization. So as we start to move up the table, immobilization. As we start to move down the table, mineralization. And we're going to talk about this in about a couple hours, okay? Because this is leading into the discussion that we'll have in soil and water. If I'm not mistaken, I think this is where my video cut off prior to class last Tuesday. Pretty much just what's important here is that we need to make sure that we're adding more organic matter and that it's decomposing at a rate faster than we're losing it, right? So how do we incorporate organic matter and get those corn stover that has this fairly high carbon to nitrogen ratio? So what happens when you go to put that fertilizer out in the fall, in the spring? What's up? So if you have a high carbon to nitrogen ratio and you go to put 100 pounds of fertilizer out in the spring, what happens to the nitrogen? One of two things. The nitrogen goes up? Yeah, because you put it out there. What happens to the carbon nitrogen ratio?
It should decrease, right?
The carbon nitrogen ratio should decrease, right, because the microbes need that nitrogen. So what happens to that nitrogen? Is it available to the plant? No. Most of these are yes or no questions. When we have a carbon to nitrogen ratio greater than 30 to 1, is it immobilized or mineralized? Immobilized. So that means that we need more nitrogen. This is the same thing as my grandfather putting the leaves in the horse manure. So we have corn stover left in the field and we apply nitrogen. Is that nitrogen available to the plant? It's not, right? Because the microbes need it in order to decrease this carbon to nitrogen ratio. So we go to put fertilizer out there, and fertilizer's not cheap right now. And here's what happens, and you go, how come I didn't get the response I expected? Nathan, dude, this is what I did, man. I'm gonna put damn 200 units of nitrogen out there, and I didn't get the response you told me I was gonna get. Well, here are some possible things that might have happened. Number one, you're in no-till. You have a lot of corn residue on there. The carbon to nitrogen ratio is a little high. So some of that nitrogen was used to break down the residues. Also, you had this corn residue out there, and going back to the nitrogen cycle, I know Michaela would know this the best. Going back to the nitrogen cycle, what happens when you put urea during the urea hydrolysis process? What is one potential loss that you could have? Volatilization, because we have corn residues, and then we're also influencing the soil acidity. There's moisture there, so now we're speeding up that the urea hydrolysis process faster than the soil can retain it. And so that's why when you go to put your nitrogen out, or like understanding and knowing what your crop residues are out here, how much mineralization or immobilization you might have. I think I might try and bring that in as a math problem to demonstrate that a little bit better, like what happens. Those are the types of things that I believe are going to be important for you as you move on. Not calculating the ion concentration, the ion activity of phosphorus in a soil. Because no one's doing that. No one's ever asked you to calculate and no one's ever gonna. So those types of things aren't beneficial to you, but this one will be. I know for a fact this one will be. And it's everything. And so you have sorghum up at the York Institute. It's got a carbon to nitrogen ratio too, and once you start to know that, you can adjust your fertilization practices so that you're not wasting it, or you at least can expect or compensate for that and get the response that you're expecting. I think those are the applications of the thought processes that are going to benefit you the most. Carbon is this organic matter. Why we're trying to do this is because it's, I don't know, man, for me, I think that organic matter is the glue of the soil. It's also the workhouse. It's like the mitochondria of the cell and the powerhouse and all this stuff. But there are three different facets of it. Chemical being the pH. It can adsorb nutrients. What are the three sources of pH dependent charge? Iron, aluminum, and oxide. And what? Functional groups of organic matter. That's what's up. So those three things, and it's the functional groups of organic matter that come in right here. That's where we get those complexation of cations and anions. That's the organic matter that is really having the influence on that. Those plant residues are going to have some of the nutrients, and that's going to improve some of our soil resilience. And resilience being that When the plant takes up the available phosphorus or these available nutrients and we remove it through the plant material, the soil has the ability to resupply that. It's like the reserve. And then down here in the physical, again, I see that as holding soil structure and soil aggregation. When I think of organic matter and these acids, these humic acids, they're kind of sticky. And if we get down to a molecular level, they still have that stickiness. Again, remember our clay particles are very small. They're also holding that organic matter. They're in the rocks that you can't, or in the clumps that you really can't see. So we have, they're broken down into typically two different substances, non-humic, which we're not really concerned with, but the humic substances we are. Those are the ones that we know the most about. Those are the ones that we can easily identify. We talked about fulvic acid being the having the lowest molecular weight, and therefore the easiest for the microbes to decompose. So if we can keep our material as fulvic acid, we will get, that can be broken down easier into humus. Just an example of the structure. We only have two of these phenolic rings that are kind of holding everything together on like the central portion of the charge. And then some of these might be easier to break down, but they're broken down first, right? So this functional group may come off. That functional group right here is the carboxylic acid. Once those are broken apart, these charges change, and we can now begin to start, the microbes can begin to break these molecules down, or they at least remove these functional groups right here, and they may contain a nitrogen or a phosphorus or a sulfur somewhere in this material. This is just kind of an example molecule of organic fulvic acid. But it might be that because we have, bless you. Okay, the functional groups of organic matter, that pH-dependent charge, this hydroxyl might be holding on to a nitrogen or a sulfur or some other cation. Humic acid, as we move up, we start to see we have a more complex molecule. It's going to be a little more difficult to break down as the molecular weight increases. It's more difficult to break down. And then finally, human. This is just this is really a guess. Whoever made this is theorizing. Over in organic chemistry, they say, well, it's probably got to be some function of this plus some other stuff, and we think this is kind of what this looks like. Human is it. You can't differentiate what it came from, where it came from, what created it. It's the combination of all of those things breaking down and then forming some new organic compound. We talked about composting. Composting is one way that we can decompose those plant materials a little bit faster. I was talking with my grandfather last night, and when I cut my grass, I have more crabgrass in there than regular grass. So when I first got here, I was like, oh, PhD, Mr. Yard Guy, like turf grass management, you better have the best yard on the block. And then I get out there and I'm mowing this stuff, and I'm like, I can't fertilize it because all I'm going to do is make the crabgrass go. I mean, I was literally windrowing my yard, and probably could have made probably at least five square bales. I'm not lying. I had grass clippings up that I collected up to here. in a spot. I don't know, I have a little space in my driveway, probably from that table to about back here. I promise you, this much grass material. Because I mean, it's crabgrass, and when I cut it and it goes off to the side, it doesn't decompose faster than the crabgrass grows underneath it. So I'm cutting last week's crabgrass as I'm trying to cut this week's crabgrass, and now I'm putting 2 weeks worth of crabgrass on when I go to cut it again. I can't get anything, so I have to rake it off so that I'm not cutting last week's crabgrass next week, because it doesn't decompose fast enough. And so, man, I got there's nothing but grass clippings, and it starts to get all moldy, and there's a little steam coming off in the morning. So it's one way that we can kind of decompose those plant materials and get a nutrient supply back and forth. This may be more sustainable agriculture. Is that something anybody is interested in, would like to discuss? Okay. Maybe a little, I think we might get in there, we might discuss a little bit more about that. Talked about some of the benefits. Right here, the primary one is going to be this carbon to nitrogen ratio decreases. Because when I have this nice lush green crabgrass, when you think nitrogen, you think green. So when I go to apply that in some carbon source, there's now nitrogen to help the microbes break down that carbon. Everyone got the notes for this one pretty much? Did I make it here? Did I get to soils?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
This is the last one.
This is the last one that we talked about.
Yeah.
All right, great. So going back to soils, the class, two of the, some of the biggest things about these soil orders is that they have greater organic matter. That our histosols are going to have the most. They have like greater than 20% organic matter. Really dark soils, really deep, because that it got turned over. We had the decomposition rate of the plant material was greater than the growth of the plant. But now our insectisols and our entosols, these are going to be our very young soils. And so in Mississippi, we have insectisols and entosols. This is what we have because the soils haven't formed well yet. So there's not a lot of organic matter in there. And what's the first thing we want to do to a brand new soil? Hey, let's grow a bunch of food on it. And let's put a whole bunch of nutrients in the soil and wonder how come we're not gaining anything. The soil's not adapted. It's like trying to get an 11-year-old to work out in the gym. Your body's not ready for that yet. So these soils aren't ready for high productivity crop production systems. They just don't have all the components that make it healthy and beneficial. But we need to grow the plant material on it so that it'll get the decomposition and we can get that organic matter back into the soil. So we might be pushing those a little harder than we need to, but we have to, because the only way we can get organic matter in there is to put organic matter on the top, right? So the kind of the thing going all the way back to the beginning of the semester is we don't really get it's a give and take, and we trade one thing in for the other. And we can't move forward because we can't do this over here, and we're shooting ourselves in the foot, and we don't care, and we're still moving forward. So for y'all, it'll be trying to figure out the balance of how to effectively move forward without hurting ourselves while we're moving forward. This climate, this is going back to that test question that we had in there, like the greater the temperature, we increase the decomposition rate, and when we add more water, we're also increasing that decomposition rate. So in the south, we are losing organic matter faster than we're replacing it, and factors that are not like that we can't control, because it's hot, it's wet, And that's exactly the environment that microbes need in order to decompose. We're tilling this stuff up, and that organic matter is getting lost. I think this is what I was kind of alluding to, this natural vegetation, that we need to grow plants in order to put the organic matter back there. Because I guess we could just run out and spread some coal, some biochar, and get some carbon sources in there, but it's really difficult to spread that much coal, and we're not getting any money back for it. The effects of texture and drainage, that's a finer texture. We're going to have greater soil organic matter, but we're going to get less organic matter decomposition. So in those endosols and those inceptisols, especially in the Mississippi Delta, kind of the alluvial floodplains is where the sand settles out, and they're new soils. We don't have a lot of organic matter. There's no charge. There's nothing for the organic matter to kind of bind with, because sands don't have very much charge on them. So something to consider, you know, where can you expect more or less organic matter based on soil texture? I was just making a statement, yeah. And then, you know, ag management and tillage. So we're real big on no-till or conservation tillage. Now, because we have to do it. No-till is great for the environment, it's great for our systems, but it's difficult on our machinery. Because you can't plant, as that soil starts to become more stable, it becomes more difficult to put that seed into the ground. And you also have a corn stalk somewhere by that planter. That seed doesn't get planted. You have that happen X number of times over a field, starts to add up. So we start to do something like strip till, where you're tilling just in the row that you're planting, and you're getting what you need where the plant's going to be. That's what we're most concerned with. So why tear up a whole field when we can just tear up a row? Kind of those principles. And then this crop removal is going to be big. Like, we're taking out more than we're putting back in. And that's just not efficient. So to me, that's like a bank account. That's like borrowing money, because robbing Peter to pay Paul. So this is just really going to be kind of like just some examples of some studies that they've done. Not that you're going to like need to know what the study was, or, you know, just kind of to get a understanding that when we grow crops in rotation, we are improving the potential to increase our soil organic matter. And we're going to kind of talk about this in soil and water. We're big on cover crops now because that's A, it's keeping our soil in place, but B, it's also influencing that carbon to nitrogen ratio in the springtime when we have corn residue that needs to be decomposed. Manures and limes and phosphorus are going to increase our soil organic matter. Let's think about why that is going to be. Let's just kind of, I'm trying to figure out how to start a discussion on why do y'all think that we have greater soil organic matter when we add a manure, lime, and phosphorus.
Increases the CEC.
So we got increased CEC. And why do we increase the CEC?
The lime.
So lime, I'm going to put this over here. So lime increased the CEC. There's one. Excellent. What else? What are we doing when we add the manure? What are we adding?
Nitrogen.
We're adding nitrogen from the manure. Probably don't need to be sitting down. Adding in a source from manure. What else?
Greater microbial activity.
Okay, right. Anything. Greater microbial activity. Why did the microbial activity become greater? Couple of things.
Change the carbon nitrogen ratio.
So we got a change in carbon to nitrogen ratio because where do we get the carbon nitrogen ratio change from? From the manure. Change CN ratio. What else? Anything. I mean, we're just going to put some stuff on the board. What else could be going on? Why do we need phosphorus?
Doesn't it help with the having much immobilization?
It helps with,
Not having as much immobilization.
okay, so we got,
I know I didn't phrase that correctly.
it's okay, we got a change in P immobilization, mineralization. Anything. Just throw something out there. What do we need phosphorus for? What do plants need P for the most? Not in the roots. This is going all the way back. Y'all haven't had crop physiology, have you? What about photosynthesis? So we go through photosynthesis and then it goes into the Krebs cycle. And what are we gaining from the Krebs cycle? It's not a problem. All right, we'll get to that in a moment. What else we got going on here? So we got that we're adding some nitrogen from the manure, right? Because that's my grandfather putting carbon down, putting leaves in there, and putting manure over it. We're also getting some carbon from the manure. We're also getting some nitrogen. And then the cows ate the plants that have what in them? Phosphorus, right? Right, so now we're getting some phosphorus that's added in there and some of those other nutrients. What else do we have? So we had a change in the carbon to nitrogen ratio. We're going to get a change in our carbon to phosphorus ratio. What else about this line, other than increasing the CEC for pH dependent charge because of the functional groups of organic matter?
Speed up the rate of decomposition
From, you're correct.
from,
Why is it speeding up the rate of decomposition though?
because it's lowering carbon and nitrogen.
The lime is?
I'm not here. That's what I'm not saying.
It's okay. No, it's fine. Like it's okay. We're gonna think through this. It's the most painful thing I ever had to do. Imagine sitting in a room full of PhDs all asking you questions about septic systems, and you're like, I didn't study that. But it's the process of walking through it and kind of going, oh, well, I'm putting all these nutrients into this system, blah blah blah, and they walked me through it. It was painful as all get out. God, it sucked. Because I was like, and this has been after 2 hours of them asking me other questions. They hit me with this last one. But we're going to walk through this, right? What about the environmental conditions needing for the microbes. The influence of lime on what?
Like whether it's like versatile or if it's covered or not? Or?
No, the lime. The lime. The microbes need a certain environment to thrive in. If it's acidic, no decomposition. Because it's acidic, they're not happy. I don't know, when I think of like acidic and basic and microbes, I think of like this like electrochemical kind of shock thing. And they're just like stuck. They're alive, but they're like paralyzed. In acidic soils, they're just kind of sitting there like, nah, we can't move. This sucks. And so then that as the pH increases, now they can start to move just a little bit, and they become a little more free, and they become a little bit better. It's kind of like the same thing as what we're going through right now. When it's cold, no one's wanting to do anything. It's stupid. I'm not going to work. I don't want to be outside right now. And so then as the temperature increases, yeah, all right, what you want to go do? You want to go play some baseball? You want to go, right? So the same thing with the pH. That when it's acidic, they're kind of stuck there and frozen. It's not an ideal environment for them. But when we increase, and now we start to increase temperature, and what do you think cow manure is? Hot or cold? Hot, right? So we have all these things that we're adding in together that we're changing, and we're not talking like macroclimate. We're not talking about we're changing the pH of the soil. We're talking about we're changing the pH of the soil right along the edge of this table. Maybe that much. Maybe we're changing the microclimate right here. The top inch or two of soil is what we're changing. And then that eventually, because it will go from hot to cold, as we start to change this, it will permeate down through the soil. So all these things go into it. That we add this lime, and we add this manure system that changes the temperature. The lime is going to change some of the pH of the cow manure. Now, I'm not a cow manure expert, or do I know what the pH of manure is, but when we add lime to it and create an environmental condition for these microbes to decompose these materials, we are increasing the CEC through pH-dependent charge. So when the plant material decomposes that we've removed all the nutrients out of the soil from, they go back into the soil, and the soil organic matter, functional groups, and CEC, the natural CEC of the soil, are holding on to those nutrients. We're changing the carbon to nitrogen ratio, which changes the microbial activity. We're creating an environment that they enjoy doing the work they're supposed to be doing. It's not quote unquote cold. When it's acidic, I'm like, I just want to get to class. And then when we get to class, we're okay. So that's kind of like that pH thing. What else? So we had change in phosphorus immobilization and mineralization. Phosphorus is important for energy. In ATP and ADP, do y'all remember that? That is why phosphorus is important. So the microbes need that phosphorus as an alternate source of energy. It's not ANP or ATN or ADN, it's phosphorus. And so when we go back to the Krebs cycle, we would see that that is the output, is ADP. And ATP, that's the energy that they get from the Krebs cycle. And everyone has a Krebs cycle. We have a Krebs cycle. So here we are back to this. They maintain those soil organic matter levels because the lime, the N, the P, and the K, the nutrients, the things that we normally do, if we replace them in sufficient amounts and we're not straining the soil, the crop residues do get broken down. But we need to create the right soil environment for this to happen. And so what happens when we harvest our crops in the fall? We'll typically apply lime for these reasons. Or you might get some manure application because the chickens or whatever the case may be, a Dr. Phenolic type, animal science type thing, whatever. So now we're working hand in hand with some producer that needs to get rid of some crap, literally, and we're putting that on our field. There might be some environmental consequences to that. That's a different class. But those are the implications of soil organic matter and putting these things out. And they didn't know that in the 1860s, 1870s. They were doing it, but they didn't know. And so the Morrow plots started evaluating that. And all they did was look at soil organic matter and the influence of rotating these different crops through. And so I want y'all to remember this oats and clover as we go into soil, and when we get into soil and water conservation, hopefully we'll get to talk about those things. And so corn being a grass, oats kind of being a cereal grass, and then clover being a legume versus grass, high carbon to nitrogen ratio every single year. That's why soil organic matter doesn't increase, because we're putting putting 57-to-1 out there every year, and we're not. And so the nitrogen that we go to apply is being used to decompose this corn stover rather than growing our plants. Am I tying that in together well enough? Like I hope I am. It's tough to see with masks and kind of brainstorms and trying to think about those things. And those are like deep. It took a long time to put all those things together. If we keep putting out 57-to-1, we don't ever get any net mineralization of nitrogen. That's the long and the short of it. And if this residue doesn't break down, it doesn't go in the soil. So no soil organic matter. Real quick, short, simple thought process to that. So that by crop rotation, we're actually putting soil organic matter in there because all of these are now working in conjunction to decompose. And this clover is going to have like a 15 or 16-to-1 carbon to nitrogen ratio. And have you ever seen clover? Even just like the regular clovers for the 4-leaf clover. Compared to a corn stalk, what is the difference in the texture? Could you beat someone with a clover? Beat someone with a corn stalk though, can't you? It's woody, it's tough, but clover is soft. Folds into a ball, it can be broken up, and it's luscious, it's got that nice, it's succulent, it's got moisture. Microbes love that because it's got the moisture that they need in order to break that stuff down. So they use the nitrogen from the cover crop to go break down the residue so that when you put your nitrogen out, it's going towards the plant because the microbes are still using the cover crop nitrogen. Light bulbs, I'm getting some light bulbs and some nods and some like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Cool. Cool.
Is that why a lot of henbit forms in the fall after you harvest?
Well, the henbit is because that's a winter weed.
Okay. I just didn't know if it was like the same because it's kind of the same texture as clover, feeling wise.
So the good thing about henbit is that it's a free weed and cover crop. So, but you're not getting any, like if You get out what you put in for it.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So there's gonna be some for that. Like there will be some decomposition, and it's soft, it's easy to break down, it's got the green, so it's taking the nutrients. I hand it. Right, so that whatever little bit of root in the very top part of that soil, it is capturing some of that. So I had a professor at Mississippi State, finished his corn, tilled up or whatever he did, and then henbit came up, just like it normally does. Like that's a perfectly good thing.
Why is that the only one that usually comes up? Why did other things? You know?
There's just no seeds there, and if no seeds have been brought there prior to, then henbit is the only thing that comes up. So it dominates that seed bank when you turn that over. You might catch some other ones, but henbit is the predominant one. And it's perfectly okay. This guy went out and sprayed everything. Killed all his weeds. Was that a smart thing to do? Why not?
Basically, it's cover crop. Well,
Basically, it's a cover crop for the soil, and he just killed it. So, like, knowing those things, like, no, it's not, and we should not want to spray herbicides as much as we possibly can. If that makes sense. Like, let's get away from doing that unless absolutely necessary. But yeah, this guy went out and sprayed whatever it was, killed the henbit, and then he had just bare cover crop. He just had bare soil on his freshly tilled soil. What do you think that field looked like?
pretty rough.
Right. He should have taken my soil and water conservation. No, just saying. Like those were the things that, you know, he just thought, yeah, I'm just going to kill all these weeds. I got some extra Roundup. Not realizing that having something on your soil is better than. So that will decompose, and that will supply some nitrogen back to the soil, but not much because it only took, you know, it was only able to scavenge the nitrogen that was right there, or the P, or the K, or whatever's there. So that contributes as well. And, you know, we could go out and take a square meter of that henbit, process it, find out what the nitrogen composition is, we can guesstimate how much henbit we have out there, figure out how much nitrogen is being added back to the soil based. When we get the soil and water, that'll make a little more sense.